In the late 12th century, the Crusader world stood on the very edge of collapse. The Kingdom of Jerusalem, once the greatest prize of Christendom, was surrounded, divided, and slowly dying. Its armies were exhausted, its nobles were divided, its enemies were gathering strength. Many believed that the age of the Crusades was coming to an end, but history had one final chapter to write. From the ashes of the Holy Land, a new Crusader kingdom would emerge, not in Jerusalem, not in Antioch, not in Acre, but on an island in the eastern Mediterranean, an island destined to become the last great stronghold of the Crusader world. Its name was Cyprus. The last great Crusader city had fallen. The dream of a Christian kingdom in the Holy Land lay buried beneath the smoking ruins of Acre, but the story of the kings of Cyprus had begun long before that final catastrophe. It began with a family from western France, the House of Lusignan. For generations the Lusignans had been powerful lords in the region of Poitou. Fierce warriors and ambitious nobles, they answered the call of the Crusades, seeking both glory and the defense of the Holy Land. Their fortunes changed through one remarkable man, Guy of Lusignan. In 1180, Guy arrived in the Kingdom of Jerusalem, kingdom already surrounded by enemies and weakened by political rivalries. His destiny became intertwined with that of Queen Sibylla, sister of one of history's most extraordinary monarchs, King Baldwin IV, known forever as the Leper King. Cyprus became the final refuge of the Crusader world. Although the Kingdom of Jerusalem had disappeared from the mainland forever, its royal title survived. The Lusignan kings of Cyprus continued to style themselves as Kings of Jerusalem, preserving the claim for generations. From their island kingdom, they dreamed that one day the holy city might be reclaimed. That day never came. Yet for nearly 300 years, the House of Lusignan transformed Cyprus into one of the most prosperous and culturally vibrant kingdoms of the medieval Mediterranean. Their castles still crown the mountains, their cathedrals still dominate the old cities, their coats of arms remain carved into ancient stone, and their story reminds us that sometimes the greatest kingdoms are not won by conquest alone, but are born from exile, survival, and the determination to begin again. Cyprus has never been a distant island. For thousands of years it has stood at the crossroads of civilization, between continents, between empires, between faiths. Kings, emperors and conquerors looked upon this island not as a remote land, but as the key to the eastern Mediterranean, and for centuries decisions made in distant capitals, in Rome, Constantinople, Jerusalem, Venice and Cairo, would shape the destiny of its people. The story of Cyprus is the story of the struggle for power at the very heart of the known world. He would never again rule Jerusalem itself. Guy established Latin rule over Cyprus and laid the foundations of a new Crusader state. After Guy's death in 1194, his brother Amalric of Lusignan succeeded him. Under Amalric and his successors, Cyprus flourished. Castles rose above mountain passes. Magnificent Gothic cathedrals transformed cities such as Nicosia and Famagusta. Merchants from Venice, Genoa, Pisa and across Europe filled Cypriot harbours with ships carrying silk, spices, sugar, wine and pilgrims. The island became the wealthiest Christian kingdom in the eastern Mediterranean. The great Muslim leader, Saladin. At their head was one of history's most famous warriors, Richard I of England, remembered forever as Richard the Lionheart. But fate had another destination in mind. As Richard's fleet crossed the eastern Mediterranean, violent storms scattered his ships across the sea. Several vessels were driven onto the shores of Cyprus, then ruled by the self-proclaimed Byzantine governor, Isaac Komnenos. Among the passengers were two women of immense importance, Richard's sister, Joanna, the widowed Queen of Sicily, and his fiancée, the young Princess Berengaria of Navarre, who would soon become Queen of England. Instead of offering sanctuary, Isaac Komnenos refused to assist the stranded nobles and attempted to seize their treasure. Some accounts suggest he even sought to hold them hostage, believing they would become valuable bargaining pieces. For Richard, this was not merely an insult, it was an act of war. Landing with his army near Limassol, Richard launched a swift and devastating campaign. Unlike anything Cyprus had witnessed for centuries, the forces of Isaac were unable to resist the disciplined English knights and crusaders. Town after town surrendered. Within weeks the island had fallen. Isaac Komnenos fled into the mountains but was relentlessly pursued. Eventually he surrendered, reportedly on the condition that he would not be imprisoned in iron chains. Richard agreed. Instead, Isaac was bound in chains of silver, a gesture that became one of the most famous stories of the conquest. With Cyprus secured, Richard achieved something remarkable. He had conquered an entire kingdom in a matter of weeks. On the 12th of May 1191, in the chapel of St. George at Limassol, Richard married Berengaria of Navarre. The ceremony was magnificent. Berengaria was crowned Queen of England on Cypriot soil, making Cyprus the unlikely setting for one of medieval Europe's most extraordinary royal weddings. Richard's sister Joanna stood beside the new queen, while Crusader nobles from across Europe gathered to witness the celebration. Yet Richard had little interest in ruling Cyprus himself. His true objective remained Jerusalem. The island was valuable, but it demanded administration, soldiers, and resources that he needed for the crusade. Seeking both funds and freedom to continue his campaign, Richard sold Cyprus to the Knights Templar. The famous military order purchased the island for a vast sum, hoping to establish a permanent Christian stronghold in the eastern Mediterranean. But the Templars soon discovered that governing Cyprus was far more difficult than conquering it. Heavy taxation and strict rule provoked widespread rebellion among the local population. Within a year, they concluded that the island was more burden than prize and returned it. Among those who departed Cyprus aboard Richard's fleet was Princess Maria Komnene, the daughter of Isaac Komnenos. Taken into Richard's custody after her father's defeat, she sailed west under royal protection. Although history records little of her later life, her journey symbolized the end of her father's brief and independent rule. As Cyprus passed into Crusader hands, the old Byzantine order vanished, replaced by a new Latin kingdom that would shape the island's history for generations. Richard the Lionheart never intended to found a kingdom in Cyprus. His goal was always Jerusalem, yet by a twist of fortune, a storm, and the ambitions of one defiant ruler, he transformed the destiny of the island forever. From Byzantine province to Crusader kingdom, Cyprus became the last great bastion of the Latin East, crossroads of empires, commerce, and faith. And it all began with a storm at sea, a captured princess, a royal wedding beneath the Cypriot sun, and the charge of the Lionheart. The Genoese merchants had grown wealthy through Mediterranean trade and coveted the prosperity of Cyprus. In 1373, following political unrest within the Lusignan court, Genoese warships appeared off the Cypriot coast. Their soldiers captured Famagusta, the island's richest city and greatest port. The loss was devastating. For generations, the Genoese held Famagusta, collecting its customs duties and controlling much of the island's international trade. The Lusignan kings still wore their crowns, but their kingdom had been crippled. As Genoese influence grew, another power waited patiently across the sea: Venice. Unlike Genoa, Venice rarely relied upon conquest alone. Its greatest weapon was diplomacy, marriage, trade, and time. By the late 15th century, the Lusignan dynasty stood on the edge of extinction. King James II, known as James the Bastard, sought an alliance powerful enough to preserve his fragile kingdom. His answer came from Venice. He married the young Venetian noblewoman Caterina Cornaro. Barely in her teens, she arrived in Cyprus, carrying not only the hopes of the Lusignan kingdom, but the ambitions of the Venetian Republic. The marriage was short. James II died suddenly in 1473, only months after the birth of their infant son, James III. The child became king in name alone. Within a year, he too was dead. Some suspected illness, others whispered of poison. No proof has ever emerged. The ancient house of Lusignan had reached its end. Now only one ruler remained, Queen Caterina Cornaro, young, intelligent, and increasingly isolated. Officially, she ruled as Queen of Cyprus. In reality, Venetian advisors surrounded her court. Venetian merchants dominated the economy. Venetian interests guided royal policy. Cyprus was becoming a Venetian kingdom long before it was one in name. Meanwhile, the Ottoman Empire expanded relentlessly across the eastern Mediterranean. Venice understood a simple truth: if Cyprus were to survive, it would need the protection of the Republic, or perhaps Venice simply wanted the island for itself. In 1489, after years of political pressure and careful diplomacy, Queen Caterina made her final decision. She abdicated the throne. The crown of Cyprus was surrendered peacefully to the Republic of Venice. There was no great battle, no dramatic siege, no final charge of knights. Instead, an ancient kingdom simply passed from one ruler to another. When Caterina departed Cyprus, thousands gathered to watch their queen leave the island she had come to love. According to later tradition, she paused for one final look at the coastline before her ship sailed west toward Venice. She would spend the rest of her life in the Italian town of Asolo, honored by the Republic, but never again wearing the crown she had surrendered. With her departure, nearly 300 years of Lusignan rule came to an end. The banners of Jerusalem disappeared. In their place flew the winged lion of St. Mark. For Venice, Cyprus became its greatest overseas possession, a fortress guarding the trade routes of the eastern Mediterranean. But for nearly 300 years, Cyprus lived under Lusignan rule. The kings were Catholic. The nobles spoke French and Italian. Latin bishops occupied the great cities, but beneath this Western kingdom, another world continued to live, the Greek Orthodox Church. For generations, Cypriot priests continued to celebrate the divine liturgy, monks remained in their monasteries, icons were painted, prayers were whispered, and ancient Byzantine traditions were passed from one generation to the next. But the Orthodox Church no longer stood at the centre of power. Its bishops were reduced in number. Its wealth and lands were challenged, and the Latin Church claimed authority over the island's official religious life. Tensions sometimes became fierce. In 1231, 13 Orthodox monks of Kantara refused to accept Latin religious practices. They were imprisoned, tortured, and eventually executed. Yet the Orthodox Church did not disappear. Far from it. It survived in the villages, the monasteries, the mountains, and most importantly, in the hearts of the Greek-speaking people of Cyprus. Imagine medieval Famagusta, Latin churches rising above the harbour, Lusignan knights riding through the streets, Venetian and Genoese merchants bargaining over trade, and only a few miles away, the bells of a Greek Orthodox monastery calling the faithful to prayer. Two Christian traditions, one island, and for almost 3 centuries they lived side by side, sometimes peacefully, sometimes bitterly, beneath the rule of the Lusignan kings. The Orthodox Church had lost political power, but it had preserved something far more difficult to conquer, the religious and cultural identity of the people of Cyprus. The year was 1570. For more than 80 years, Cyprus had been a possession of the Republic of Venice. Its ports guarded the eastern Mediterranean. Its fertile plains supplied grain, sugar, and cotton to the markets of Europe. Its fortresses stood as the last great Venetian outpost before the shores of the Ottoman Empire. But to Sultan Selim II, Cyprus was unfinished business. The island lay at the crossroads of empires, commanding the sea routes between Constantinople, Egypt, and the Levant. To control Cyprus was to dominate the eastern Mediterranean. In the summer of 1570, one of the largest invasion forces ever assembled in the region crossed the sea. More than 300 ships carried an army of perhaps 60,000 men. At its head stood one of the Ottoman Empire's most experienced commanders, Lala Mustafa Pasha. The invasion began near Larnaca. The Ottoman army marched inland toward the island's capital, Nicosia. Behind newly built Venetian walls, the defenders prepared for a siege. Soldiers, mercenaries, local militia, and frightened civilians waited as the Ottoman guns took their positions. Then the bombardment began. For weeks, enormous cannons pounded the walls without mercy. Stone cracked, towers crumbled. Day and night, the city shook beneath explosions. On the 9th of September, 1570, the Ottomans launched their final assault. Wave after wave of soldiers surged toward the breaches. The fighting was desperate, hand to hand, street by street. When the walls finally collapsed, the city was overwhelmed. What followed became one of the darkest chapters in the history of Cyprus. Thousands of defenders and civilians were killed. Many more were taken captive and sold into slavery throughout the Ottoman Empire. Churches were looted, homes were destroyed. The medieval capital that had flourished for centuries was left devastated. Yet one city still resisted, Famagusta. Protected by some of the strongest fortifications in Europe, the great harbour city stood defiant beneath the banner of St. Mark. Its defence was entrusted to the experienced Venetian commander, Marco Antonio Bragadin. Alongside him stood fewer than 10,000 soldiers and civilians. They faced an Ottoman army, many times their number. The siege began in September 1570. It would last almost 11 months. The defenders endured relentless artillery fire. Food became scarce. Disease spread through the crowded streets. Every breach in the walls was repaired under cover of darkness. Every assault was beaten back. Again and again, the enormous bastions of Famagusta refused to fall. The siege became one of the greatest defensive actions of the Renaissance. Lala Mustafa Pasha had expected victory within days. Instead, his army suffered enormous losses. Thousands of Ottoman soldiers died before the city's walls, but courage alone could not defeat starvation. By the summer of 1571, Famagusta had exhausted its food, ammunition, and hope. Bragadin requested terms. Lala Lala Mustafa agreed, the defenders would surrender peacefully. The surviving soldiers would be permitted to leave Cyprus safely. For a brief moment, it appeared the long nightmare had ended. Then everything changed. Shortly after the surrender, Lala Mustafa accused Bragadin of murdering Ottoman prisoners during the siege. Whether the accusation was true remains fiercely debated by historians. What followed is beyond dispute. Bragadin was seized. His officers were executed. He was imprisoned, beaten, and publicly humiliated before the citizens of Famagusta. Then, on the 17th of August, 1571, he was subjected to one of history's most infamous acts of cruelty. Before a gathered crowd, Marco Antonio Bragadin was flayed alive. According to contemporary accounts, he endured unimaginable agony without renouncing his faith. His skin was removed and later stuffed with straw, dressed in military uniform, and displayed as a warning to others who might resist Ottoman power. The brutality shocked Europe. Bragadin became a symbol of sacrifice and steadfast resistance. His preserved skin was eventually recovered by Venetian sailors years later and returned to Venice, where it remains today in the Basilica of Saints John and Paul. With the fall of Famagusta, the conquest of Cyprus was complete. Nearly 3 centuries of Latin rule had ended. The island entered a new chapter under Ottoman administration, one that would reshape its society, religion, and culture for centuries to come. Yet the memory of the siege endured. The shattered walls of Famagusta still bear the scars of thousands of cannonballs. The bastions that once echoed with gunfire still stand above the sea, and the story of Marco Antonio Bragadin, the commander who refused to surrender until every hope was exhausted, remains one of the most powerful and tragic episodes in the long history of Cyprus. On the 7th of October, 1571, the Mediterranean became a battlefield. Near the entrance to the Gulf of Patras, 2 enormous fleets prepared to meet. On one side stood the Ottoman navy, advancing westward with hundreds of ships. Opposing them was the Holy League, an alliance of Venice, Spain, the Papal States, Genoa, and other Christian powers united against the growing Ottoman threat. The clash would become known as the Battle of Lepanto. But the battle did not begin suddenly. For years the Ottoman Empire had been expanding across the Mediterranean. In 1570, Ottoman forces invaded Cyprus. Then a Venetian possession, the siege of Cyprus ended with the fall of Famagusta in August 1571. The shocking news spread across Europe. Pope Pius V called for a great Christian alliance to stop the Ottoman advance. Ships gathered from across the Mediterranean, and finally, on that October morning, the 2 fleets sighted one another. Rows of oarsmen pulled their ships forward, cannons were loaded, thousands of soldiers waited on the decks. Then the Ottoman and Christian fleets began closing the distance. The greatest naval battle of the 16th century was about to begin, and within hours the Mediterranean would be forever changed. In 1821, after centuries under Ottoman rule, the Greeks rose in rebellion, beginning a struggle that would change the history of Europe. Among the most remarkable figures was Laskarina Bouboulina, a wealthy shipowner who put her fortune, ships and sailors behind the revolution. Commanding her own fleet, she helped blockade the Ottoman stronghold of Nafplio and supported Greek forces across the Peloponnese. On land, Theodoros Kolokotronis, the legendary Old Man of Morea, became one of the revolution's greatest commanders. His knowledge of mountain warfare helped defeat Ottoman armies at battles such as Dervanakia and secure the revolution in the Peloponnese. But victory did not come easily. After years of war, foreign intervention, and the naval victory at Navarino helped turn the tide. And in 1828, Ioannis Kapodistrias arrived as governor, working to build a functioning Greek state and secure international recognition. By 1830, Greek independence was formally recognized. The revolution had succeeded, and modern Greece was born. The year was 1878. For more than 3 centuries, Cyprus had been part of the Ottoman Empire. Empires had risen and fallen. Venetian banners had vanished from the island's fortresses. The crescent of the Ottoman Sultan, now flew over its cities, but across Europe, the balance of power was changing once again. The Ottoman Empire, once feared across 3 continents, had entered a long period of decline. European diplomats called it the sick man of Europe. As Ottoman authority weakened, another empire looked eastward, the British Empire. At the heart of Britain's government stood one of the Victorian era's most influential statesmen, Prime Minister Benjamin Disraeli. Disraeli understood that Britain depended upon its routes to India, the jewel of the empire. The recent opening of the Suez Canal in 1869 had transformed global trade. Ships no longer needed to sail around Africa. The Eastern Mediterranean had become one of the world's most strategically important regions. Whoever controlled its sea lanes could influence the destiny of an empire. Meanwhile, another crisis unfolded. Russia had defeated the Ottoman Empire in the Russo-Turkish War of 1877 to 1878 and was expanding its influence toward the Mediterranean. Britain feared that Russian dominance would threaten both the Ottoman Empire and Britain's access to India. Disraeli sought a solution, not through war, but through diplomacy. In June 1878, Britain and the Ottoman Empire reached a secret agreement known as the Cyprus Convention. Its terms were simple. Britain would support the Ottoman Empire against further Russian expansion. In return, the Ottoman Sultan agreed to hand over the administration of Cyprus to Britain. Remarkably, the island was not formally ceded. On paper, Cyprus remained Ottoman territory. In reality, Britain would govern it. On the 22nd of July, 1878, British troops landed on the island. Days later, the Union Jack was raised above the government buildings. Without a battle, without a siege, nearly 300 years of Ottoman administration quietly came to an end. For many Cypriots, the arrival of Britain inspired hope. New roads were surveyed, modern courts were established, government administration became more centralised, public health gradually improved, education expanded, telegraph lines connected the island more closely to the outside world. Yet not all expectations were fulfilled. Cyprus remained a poor colony. Its people were required to pay a heavy annual tribute to the Ottoman Sultan, a payment that Britain had agreed to make under the Cyprus Convention, but largely financed through taxation on the island itself. Many Cypriots came to see this as an unfair burden. Among the island's Greek population, another idea began to gather strength: enosis, union with Greece. Inspired by the recent unification of the Greek state, many believed Cyprus should one day become part of the modern Greek nation. At the same time, many Turkish Cypriots viewed continued British rule as preferable to political union with Greece, fearing what such a change might mean for their own future. The seeds of a new political divide had been planted. Although Britain initially governed Cyprus on behalf of the Ottoman Empire, history intervened once again. When the First World War erupted in 1914, the Ottoman Empire joined the Central Powers against Britain and its allies. Britain responded decisively. It formally annexed Cyprus. The legal connection with the Ottoman Empire was finally severed. In 1925, Cyprus became an official crown colony of the British Empire. For the next 82 years, Britain would leave an indelible mark upon the island. Railways crossed the Messaoria Plain. Modern ports expanded. English law influenced the legal system. Military bases were established, and Cyprus became one of Britain's most important strategic outposts in the Eastern Mediterranean. But beneath the stability of imperial rule, national aspirations continued to grow. The question of Cyprus's future had not been answered, it had merely been postponed. The arrival of the British in 1878 marked the end of one empire and the beginning of another, a peaceful transfer of power that would shape the island for generations and set the stage for for the turbulent struggle that would eventually lead Cyprus toward independence.